Imagine stepping onto a luxury cruise, expecting sunshine, cocktails, and laughter. But once the ship leaves port, you realize the ocean carries more than just waves. Passengers vanish without explanation. Cabins whisper when no one is inside. Shadows bend and move against the light. And some photographs reveal faces that should have been long gone. The stories you're about to hear are not fiction. They're drawn from verified reports, real encounters, carefully rechecked from Reddit and other first-hand accounts. These are ordinary people who boarded a ship for vacation and came back changed forever. So, dim the lights, put on your headphones, and remember, you are just one passenger among thousands, but the ship never forgets its own. This is Midnight Outcry. Make sure you subscribe, hit the bell icon so you don't miss the next voyage, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Because after tonight, you may never look at a cruise ship the same way again. Story 1. I've never been the type to scare easy. My name's Daniel, I'm 31, and I work as a mechanic back home in Orlando. Grease, noise, busted engines. Those are the things I understand. Machines break because of wear and tear, not because of curses or hauntings. That's always been my logic. Ghost stories? I used to laugh at them, the kind of tales people tell on camping trips to freak each other out. Last summer, my girlfriend Brooke begged me to book a cruise with her. 7 nights out of Miami, a chance to disconnect from work and bills and just breathe ocean air for once. I wasn't thrilled about being stuck at sea, but I figured, why not? Free food, sunshine, and no cars to fix for a week. What I didn't know was that the ship had plans of its own, and I'd come back with memories that still keep me awake most nights. From the moment we boarded, everything felt picture perfect. The air carried that sharp tang of salt water. The hum of the engines vibrated faintly under my shoes, and the ship itself groaned and flexed like an enormous living thing. It was all new to me, and for a while, I let myself get caught up in it. Drinks by the pool, live music in the atrium, the steel railings warm from the sun. It felt safe, comforting almost. But that first night, something unsettled me. Brooke was already asleep in our cabin, lulled by the steady rocking of the waves. I couldn't sleep, so I slipped out and wandered the hallways. The lights overhead flickered just faintly, the way fluorescent bulbs do when they're about to die, but no one else seemed to notice. And then, in the reflection of a glass panel beside the stairwell, I saw him. A man in a black hoodie, standing right behind me. Only when I spun around, the hallway was empty. I told myself it was just exhaustion. Long day, too much sun, maybe a couple of beers more than I should have had. That's why I went back to bed without waking Brooke, lying there with my eyes on the dark ceiling, listening to the steady drone of the ship's engines deep below us. But my heart wouldn't slow down. The next morning at breakfast, Brooke noticed I was off. She asked if I was seasick, and I almost said yes, just to make it simple. But I told her the truth, that I thought I saw someone in the hallway who wasn't there. She brushed it off with a laugh, saying, "Maybe you just saw your reflection." I wanted to believe her. That day, the ship was alive with sound. The thud of music on the pool deck, the laughter of kids running, the constant metallic creak as steel shifted against steel. But no matter where I went, I had this strange sense that I was being watched. It was subtle, like the moment before someone taps you on the shoulder. Later that afternoon, I signed up for a photography class in the lounge. The instructor handed out old-school Polaroid cameras for practice, and I thought it'd be fun to capture a few shots. I lined up the first photo, pointed toward Brooke as she sipped her cocktail, and snapped. The picture developed slowly in my hand, colors bleeding to life. But when the image cleared, Brooke wasn't alone. There was a man behind her. A man in a black hoodie, his head tilted just slightly, his eyes hidden in shadow. I froze. The spot behind Brooke had been empty. I'd swear on my life it was. I even turned around in the lounge, scanning the tables, the bar, the doorway. Nothing. When I showed Brooke the photo, her face paled. She didn't laugh this time. She just said, "Delete it, tear it up, whatever. Just get rid of it." But the thing about Polaroids is, They're instant. You can't delete them. And no matter what I did, I couldn't bring myself to tear it apart. I slipped the Polaroid into the drawer beside the bed, hiding it under a few receipts and brochures from the ship. I told myself I wouldn't look at it again. But that night, as I lay in the dark, I couldn't get it out of my head. The face was wrong. The way the hood hung low over the eyes. The way the mouth curved into a smile that didn't reach it. It looked like someone who knew me. Like someone who'd been waiting. The engines throbbed faintly through the mattress. A low, constant vibration. The smell of salt clung to the air conditioning, sharp and metallic. And underneath it all, I thought I heard something else. Footsteps in the corridor outside our door. Slow, even, pacing back and forth. Brooke shifted in her sleep, and I stayed awake until the first hint of dawn bled through the curtains. I told myself I'd dreamt the whole thing, but in the morning, the Polaroid drawer was open. And the picture wasn't inside. I didn't tell Brooke. I didn't want her to think I was losing it. Instead, I carried on like nothing was wrong, even as my stomach churned through breakfast. That day, I avoided the lounge, the pool, anywhere crowded. I walked the outer decks alone, watching the sea churn in endless blue-gray folds. For a while, I thought the fresh air might help. That was until I spotted him again, leaning on the railing 2 levels down. Same hoodie, same tilt of the head. Just standing there, still, like a shadow pressed against the bright ocean sky. And when I tried to blink him away, he wasn't gone. He was staring right up at me. I backed away from the railing and hurried inside, bumping into a crew member who muttered something under his breath. I didn't even apologize. I just needed to get away. That evening, I finally cracked and told Brooke everything. She listened, her hands tight around her glass, her eyes darting toward the cabin door every time I mentioned footsteps. When I finished, she said softly, "I believe you," and that should have comforted me, but instead, it made my blood run cold, because if she believed me, it meant I wasn't imagining it. And later that night, when the cabin phone rang, it confirmed it. I answered on the second ring, whispering, "Hello?" even though I didn't know why I kept my voice down. On the other end, silence, and then breathing. Slow, steady, and close. I slammed the phone down so hard it rattled on the receiver. Brooke woke with a start, asking what happened, but I just shook my head, staring at the door. Because in the reflection of the dark TV screen across the room, I could swear I saw him, standing behind us. The next morning, Brooke begged me to go to guest services. She said we should tell someone, report that we were being followed, even if it sounded crazy. I agreed, mostly because I couldn't take the way she kept looking over her shoulder. The woman at the desk was polite, but her smile was rehearsed. When I explained, her eyes flicked briefly to the security officer nearby, then back to me. She said there had been no reports of suspicious activity and that the ship's CCTV would show if anyone had been outside our cabin. I asked her to check. She promised she would and told me to enjoy my day. But when I pressed further, the officer finally stepped in. He asked for my cabin number and wrote it down on a clipboard, his pen scratching slowly as though he already knew what he'd write. Then he looked up at me with an expression I'll never forget, like pity. "Stay in well-lit areas, sir. Keep your cabin door locked." That was it. No explanation, no reassurance. Just that. I tried to brush it off, but all day I noticed things. Reflections in windows that didn't match, an extra shadow in photographs that passengers took on deck. Once, I even overheard a family complaining that their son swore someone had been sitting next to him in the theater, even though the seat was empty. It wasn't just me. That night, Brooke and I tried to stay awake together, playing cards under the dim light. But around 2 a.m., the power flickered. The lamps died. The hum of the AC cut out. And in the silence, footsteps. Not in the hall this time. Inside the room. Brooke clutched my hand so hard her nails dug into my skin. The bathroom door creaked open. I aimed my phone flashlight toward it, shaking so hard the beam jittered across the walls. Nothing. But when I turned back toward the bed, the Polaroid was there. on the pillow. The man's face sharper now, the smile wider. Brooke screamed. I grabbed the photo, stuffed it into my pocket, and we bolted into the hallway. Other passengers peeked out of their cabins, startled by the commotion. But none of them saw what we saw when we looked back into the room. Someone was standing in the dark by our bed. We begged the staff for another cabin. At first they hesitated, muttering about policy, but when Brooke started crying, they finally relented and moved us 2 decks higher. For a while it worked. The new room felt clean, untouched, almost safe. We even managed to laugh at ourselves, saying we were letting paranoia ruin a trip that was supposed to be about fun. But then, on the 3rd day in that cabin, the phone rang again. Same time, same breathing, and that night, when we came back from dinner, there was another Polaroid on the bed. This time, it wasn't Brooke in the picture. It was me, sitting at the dining table, looking down at my plate. Behind me stood the man in the hoodie. Brooke wanted to throw it overboard, but I couldn't. Something about the picture felt like proof, like if I destroyed it, I'd lose my only evidence that this was real. The next morning, we confronted the security officer again. His face tightened when he saw the Polaroid, but instead of shock, there was recognition. He muttered something under his breath, then finally leaned closer. You need to understand, he's been on this ship for years. He shows up in photos, in cabins, in reflections. Some say he's a lost passenger, others say he never existed at all. But whatever you do, don't let him follow you home. Follow us home. The words haunted me the rest of the cruise. Every time I looked over my shoulder, every time I glanced at a window or mirror, I half expected to see him. On the last night, I barely slept. I sat in the dark, staring at the Polaroids lined up on the desk. Each one seemed darker than before, like the figure was pressing closer, clearer. And then morning came. Disembarkation. Relief. Except when I got back to Texas, unpacking my bag, I found something I couldn't explain. Tucked inside my jeans pocket, folded neatly, was a final Polaroid. Not of the ship. Not of Brooke. Of my house, the living room, the couch, the TV, and the man in the hoodie, sitting there, waiting. Story 2. I don't scare easy. I work construction back home in Ohio, which means loud machines, long nights, and guys who think pulling pranks is a personality trait. But what happened on that cruise last summer? It's different. It's the kind of thing that sticks under your skin. Even now, sitting in my apartment, the memory of that voice over the ship's speakers makes me keep the TV on at night, just so I don't have to sit with the silence. My name's Eric, I'm 31, and I'd never been on a cruise before. My girlfriend Natalie had talked me into it. She called it our big escape, 7 days away from work stress, bills, and Ohio winters. I figured it would be nothing but buffets, sunburns, and overpriced drinks. Just another floating hotel. That first night, the ship felt alive. You don't realize how massive these things are until you're walking the decks. The constant hum of the engines vibrated underfoot. The steel frame creaked when the waves slapped against the hull, and the air smelled sharp, like salt and diesel mixed together. I remember standing by the railing, staring out into nothing but black ocean, thinking, so this is it, no escape unless you swim. Natalie laughed when I said it. She loved the sea. I hated how endless it looked. It was close to midnight when we decided to head back to our cabin. We were in one of those inside rooms, no windows, just 4 walls and the low buzz of air conditioning. Natalie fell asleep instantly. I was half dozing, half listening to the faint thrum of the engines when the PA system crackled to life. That was the first time. The voice wasn't the cheerful cruise director or the captain with his polished accent. It was flat, distorted, like it was playing through a bad tape. Attention passengers, lifeboat drill begins now. I sat up straight. My stomach tightened. I'd been paying attention at the safety briefing earlier that day. Lifeboat drills were always scheduled, and we'd already done ours. Natalie stirred but didn't wake. The announcement repeated, softer this time, like it was drifting through static. Lifeboat drill begins. And then silence. I waited, ears straining, but nothing followed. No alarms, no footsteps in the hallway, no one moving. Just the steady thrum of the ship. The next morning, when I asked one of the crew about it, they gave me a polite smile and said no announcements had been made after 10 p.m. I must have been dreaming, they said. But I knew I hadn't. That was just the beginning. The second night should have been better. Sun all day, too many drinks at the pool bar, and Natalie dragging me through some ridiculous dance class on the upper deck. I thought I'd be too exhausted to notice anything strange, but as soon as the lights went out in our cabin, I was wide awake again. That's when I realized how loud the ship actually was. Not the music or the parties. Those died down eventually. I mean the bones of the ship. The steel expanding and groaning, the low rumble of the engines buried deep below us, and the occasional shudder when we hit a bigger wave. Every sound felt amplified inside that windowless room. Natalie snored softly beside me, totally unbothered. Then, around 1:15 a.m., the speakers hissed. My chest tightened instantly. Attention, attention. Passengers remain in your cabins. Do not open your doors. The voice was the same as before, monotone, broken, like it was being dragged through static. I froze, listening. My first thought was that maybe this was a real emergency. But if it was, why wasn't there an alarm? Why wasn't anyone pounding down the halls? I slipped out of bed and pressed my ear to the cabin door. Silence. No footsteps, no panic. Just that low mechanical hum vibrating through the walls. The announcement repeated, dragging out longer this time, the distortion sharper. Remain in your cabins. Do not open your doors. And then, faintly, beneath the distortion, I swear I heard something else. A kind of muffled sound, almost like banging. Like fists pounding against metal, far away, but caught on the line. Natalie stirred, asking what I was doing. I lied and said nothing. I didn't want her to hear it, didn't want her to think I was losing it. By morning, the announcement was gone. Everything was normal. Families eating pancakes, kids screaming in the pool, the same over-enthusiastic cruise director on the mic. I asked another crew member, this time one of the bartenders who seemed more laid back. He swore the PA system was locked after midnight. Nobody uses it, he said. Not unless it's a real emergency. So why had I heard it twice, and why, later that day, did I catch a woman on the pool deck staring at me like she knew something? She didn't blink, didn't smile, just locked eyes with me for too long before turning away like nothing happened. That night, I started dreading the silence. The first night on that cruise should have been unforgettable for the right reasons. Open sea, endless food, music spilling from every deck. Instead, I remember it because of a sound I wasn't supposed to hear. It was late, past midnight, when the loudspeakers crackled to life. At first, I thought it was just a routine announcement, maybe some late-night event I didn't care about. But then the voice came through. Attention passengers, remain in your cabins. Do not open your doors. The words dragged through static, broken, almost robotic. My first thought was, emergency. Fire? Security? But no alarms blared, no footsteps echoed through the hallway outside. Nothing. Just silence. My name's Kyle. I'm 31, and I work as a mechanic in Cincinnati. I'm not the type to spook easy. I've been under cars while they rattled like coffins, crawled through basements infested with mold and rats, but something about that voice froze me. It wasn't urgent. It wasn't commanding. It was wrong, like it wasn't meant for me to hear. I was sharing the cabin with my girlfriend Natalie. She was half asleep when the announcement came on, mumbling at me to get back in bed. I didn't tell her what it said. I didn't want to wake her fully, and honestly, I didn't want to repeat it aloud. The words felt dangerous, like saying them would make them more real. The next morning, everything looked fine. Families loading plates at the buffet, kids running on the pool deck, couples drinking cocktails. The crew acted like nothing had happened. I pulled aside a young staff member clearing plates and asked if they'd made any announcements during the night. He gave me this blank look and said no. The PA system was only used for official communication, nothing after midnight, unless it was life or death. So why had I heard it? That question kept me up the second night. The walls hummed with the low growl of the engines. The air felt heavy, carrying the smell of steel and salt. Natalie slept like a rock beside me, her breathing steady. And then, just like before, the static crawled from the speakers. Attention passengers, remain in your cabins. Do not open your doors. My blood turned to ice. But this time, beneath the distortion, I heard something else. A faint rhythm, like fists pounding against metal. Dull, desperate thuds caught in the background of the transmission. I pressed my ear to the cabin door. The hallway was silent. No footsteps. No voices. Just the groan of the ship shifting under its own weight. When the announcement ended, I waited for it to repeat. It didn't. I stood there in the dark, heart hammering, listening for any sound at all. By daylight, it was as if none of it had happened. Except something had changed. On the pool deck later that afternoon, I noticed a woman staring at me. She was middle-aged, sun hat pulled low, sitting alone with an untouched drink. At first, I thought she was just zoning out, but her eyes never moved. They stayed locked on me, unblinking. It went on long enough that I turned away, uncomfortable. When I looked back, she was gone. By the third night, I dreaded bedtime. It came again, the crackle, the static, the voice. But this time, it wasn't the same. Attention passenger, Kyle, remain in your cabin. Do not open your door. My name. It said my name. I stumbled backward from the speaker, my stomach flipping. Natalie stirred, asking what was wrong, but I couldn't form words. The voice had been too clear, too deliberate. I grabbed the phone and dialed guest services. It rang and rang before finally disconnecting. No answer. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the chair by the cabin door, staring at it like something was waiting outside. The next day, I searched the ship for that woman again, the one who'd stared at me. I found her in a quiet corner of the library, hunched over a book she wasn't reading. I approached cautiously, my hands shaking. "Excuse me," I said, Were you staring at me yesterday?" She looked up slowly. Her eyes were bloodshot, like she hadn't slept in days. She didn't deny it. She just said one thing. "You hear it too, don't you?" My chest tightened. "The announcements?" She nodded. "Don't listen. Don't answer it. And for God's sake, don't open your door." I pressed her for more, but she just shut her book and walked away, leaving me standing there with a pit in my stomach. That night, the announcement came again. This time, the voice wasn't distorted. It was clear, human. "Kyle, open your door." Natalie stirred beside me, half asleep, asking why I was up again. I begged her to stay put, to not move, but she was already climbing out of bed. "It's just a PA, babe. Calm down." I watched in horror as she reached for the handle. The voice came again, sharper, almost pleading now. "Open your door." I leapt across the cabin and yanked her back, slamming the lock shut. She fought me at first, confused and irritated until she saw my face. I wasn't panicking for nothing. The speaker crackled one last time. "Next time, don't make me ask twice." Then silence. The following day, I cornered one of the officers near the bridge. I demanded answers. He gave me a rehearsed smile and said there were no late-night announcements, no technical glitches. If I was hearing voices, maybe I should see the ship's medic, but the look in his eyes betrayed something. He knew. He wasn't surprised. He was just pretending. That night, I shoved a chair under the handle, stacked our luggage in front of the door, anything to keep it from opening. Natalie was terrified now too. At 2:00 a.m., the announcement came. "Kyle, you can't hide forever." The walls groaned, the ship shuddered, and then knocks. From the hallway, heavy, deliberate. Knocks that grew louder and louder until it felt like whoever, whatever it was, would smash the door down. Natalie was crying, clutching my arm, begging me not to move. I pressed my back against the barricade, praying the lock would hold. Then, silence. When I opened my eyes, it was morning. The luggage was still in place. The chair still braced against the door. But something was wrong. There was water pooled under the door. Just a thin sheet, maybe an inch, soaking the carpet. Salt water. We packed our things and demanded to be moved to a different cabin. The staff complied without question. Too quickly. Like they'd done this before. The last night, we stayed awake, waiting. But the announcement never came. The speakers stayed dead silent. For a moment, I thought maybe it was over. Then, as we disembarked the ship, I saw her again. The woman from the pool deck, the library. She was standing near the gangway, eyes locked on me one final time. And she mouthed 2 words, slow and deliberate. "Not over." When I finally got home, I emptied my suitcase on the bed. Clothes, sunscreen, the souvenirs Natalie bought. And at the very bottom, tucked into the side pocket, was something I didn't pack. A key card. The same as the ones the ship used, but instead of our cabin number, it had one word printed across it. Broadcast. I keep it locked away now, but sometimes, late at night, I swear I hear the faint crackle of static in my apartment. And when it happens, I can't help but wonder, am I still on that ship? So if you're watching this, do yourself a favor. Subscribe to Midnight Outcry, because stories like these are real, checked, and retold, so no one forgets. And trust me, when a ship calls your name, you'll want every warning you can get. Story 3, I never thought a cruise ship could feel empty. That's the part that still messes with my head. A vessel carrying over 3,000 people should be alive every second. The thrum of engines below, the shuffle of feet above, laughter, music, dishes clattering in dining rooms. But there was one deck on that ship that felt wrong. Too still, too silent. And the worst part? It was never supposed to exist. My name's Aaron. I'm 32, and I work IT back home in Portland. Cruises weren't my thing. I've always preferred mountains to oceans, but my younger sister Emily begged me to come along. She'd scored a last-minute deal on a Caribbean route and didn't want to go alone. I figured, fine. A week at sea, free food, maybe even time to clear my head after a rough breakup. Emily was the opposite of me. Outgoing, talkative, she could strike up a conversation with anyone. Within an hour of boarding, she already knew half our dining table. Me? I just wanted a beer and somewhere quiet to sit. That's how it always was with us. She pulled me into life, and I dragged my feet behind her. The first night went fine. Too fine, honestly. Sunset over the open water, tropical drinks, live music on the pool deck. But when I went back to our cabin, something felt off. The walls vibrated with the hum of the engines, steady and low. The air smelled faintly metallic, like wet steel. And when I tried to fall asleep, the sound of footsteps echoed faintly from somewhere above us, not the usual shuffle of passengers, more deliberate. Slow. Like someone pacing back and forth. I told myself it was nothing, just a ship settling, or a late-night jogger. But then, Emily disappeared. When I say Emily disappeared, I don't mean she got lost in a crowd or wandered off drunk. I mean, 1 second she was there, laughing with a couple she'd just met in the atrium bar, and the next, she wasn't. I'd gone to grab us drinks. 2 mojitos. I remember exactly. The bar was packed, The usual first-night buzz on a ship. I had to wait maybe 3 minutes at most. When I came back, Emily's chair was empty. No sign of her. The couple she'd been chatting with just looked at me, confused. "Your friend just walked off," the woman said, frowning. "We thought she was meeting you, but I hadn't seen her leave. And the way she'd just vanished without a word. It didn't fit." Emily was many things, but rude wasn't one of them. I checked the bathrooms, the casino, even the elevators. Nothing. My phone had no service, obviously. It was airplane mode, or pay the insane roaming charges. By midnight, I was pacing the decks, trying not to panic. It wasn't until I hit deck 7 that I realized something strange. The stairwell door opened onto a corridor I didn't recognize. No signage, no artwork like the other decks, just plain metal walls, bare bulbs overhead, the smell of damp steel stronger here. The hum of the engines was louder, vibrating through the soles of my shoes. I thought maybe I'd wandered into a crew area by mistake. But then I saw her. Emily. Or at least, I thought it was her. She stood at the far end of the corridor, her back to me. Her dress, blue floral, the one she'd bought just for the trip, was damp, clinging to her like she'd stepped out of water. Her hair dripped down her shoulders, darker than it had been earlier. "Emily!" I shouted. She didn't move. The corridor lights flickered, buzzing like a bad fluorescent tube. And then she stepped sideways, right through a door that wasn't there before. My stomach dropped. The wall had been solid a second earlier. No seams, no outline, just steel. But she slipped into it like it was open. I froze, trying to process what I'd seen. Then I realized something worse. The humming of the engines had stopped. The air was dead silent, and the ship wasn't moving. I didn't realize how much comfort that constant engine hum had been giving me until it stopped. The silence pressed in like a weight, thick and suffocating. On a cruise ship, you're never supposed to hear silence. There's always something. Music from a bar, the shuffle of footsteps, the vibration under your feet reminding you you're still cutting through water. But here, nothing. I forced myself down the corridor, each step echoing too loud. My shoes squeaked against the damp floor, like I was walking on a freshly mopped basement, not a luxury liner. "Emily," I tried again, my voice cracking. It sounded swallowed, like the metal walls were absorbing the sound instead of bouncing it back. I reached the place where I thought she'd vanished, running my hand along the wall. It was cold, slick with condensation. My fingers brushed something, an edge. At first, I thought it was just a seam in the metal, but when I pressed, the panel shifted slightly, like it was hiding a door. My pulse slammed against my ribs. Every rational part of me wanted to back away, find security, alert someone. But logic and fear wrestled inside me, and fear won. I couldn't leave without her. I pressed harder. The panel gave way with a metallic groan, swinging open just enough for me to slip inside. The air that hit me was colder, ranker. Salt mixed with something sour, like rotting seaweed. I lifted my phone, flicking on the flashlight. The beam cut into the dark, revealing another hallway, this one narrower, unfinished, the pipes overhead dripping steadily. The sound of each drop hitting the floor was deafening in that silence. And then, faintly, music. Not the lively guitar and steel drums that had been echoing across the pool deck earlier. This was warped, dragging, like an old gramophone playing underwater. A ballroom waltz slowed to half speed, warped so badly it made the hairs rise on the back of my neck. I followed it, because what else could I do? The hallway bent sharply, then opened into a space I swear shouldn't exist on any ship. It looked like a copy of the main dining room, but wrong. The chandeliers overhead were rusted, dripping seawater. The tables, dressed in white linens, were covered in mold. Plates and silverware sat neatly arranged, though each glass was filled with black, stagnant water. And people were there, at least shapes that looked like people. Dozens of them, sitting upright at the tables, their heads slowly turning toward me in eerie unison. Their skin was gray-blue, bloated, waterlogged. Clothes clung to them like they'd just been dragged from the ocean floor. I stumbled back, but then I saw her, Emily, sitting at one of the tables, eyes fixed on me. She smiled weakly, lips pale, water dripping from her chin. "Sit," she whispered. Her voice was hoarse, like it came through water. "They don't like it when you stand." I couldn't breathe. The smell, the stillness, the impossible sight of Emily sitting among those things, it all pressed down on me at once. My first instinct was to run, but her eyes locked on mine. They weren't the eyes of a stranger or a hallucination. They were hers, brown, flecked with green, wide and pleading. "Sit," she whispered again, only this time her lips barely moved, and yet I heard the word perfectly in my head. My knees buckled before I even realized it, and I slid into the chair across from her. The wood felt damp, like it had been underwater for years. My hands shook against the edge of the table. Every other figure in the room turned their heads back toward their plates as though satisfied. The air filled with the faint clinking of cutlery against porcelain, but no one ate. No one lifted a fork. The sound was mechanical, wrong, like it was meant to mimic life but didn't understand how. I leaned forward, trying to keep my voice steady. "Emily, we need to go. Now." She shook her head almost imperceptibly. A drop of water fell from her hair, rippling across the untouched soup bowl in front of her. "They won't let us. Once you're here, you stay." My stomach nodded. "What is this place? This isn't the ship." Her face flickered with something like recognition. "It is, but not the one you boarded." She swallowed hard. "It's the other side of it. The part no one is supposed to see." I didn't understand. Couldn't. My brain scrambled for an explanation. Maybe gas, maybe hallucination, maybe I'd hit my head. But the chill that seeped through my skin told me this wasn't a dream. The warped waltz shifted, notes bending until it sounded more like groaning steel under pressure. And then one of the drowned figures at the table nearest to us stood. Water poured from his sleeves, pooling around his feet. His mouth opened too wide, stretching until the skin split, and a sound poured out. Not a scream, not even a voice. It was the sound of rushing waves, endless, crashing, flooding into the room, though no water followed. Emily flinched. I grabbed her hand instinctively. It was ice cold, soaked, but solid. Not a ghost. She squeezed back just once before pulling away. "They'll notice you," she whispered, "if you don't play along." And then, like it had been rehearsed, every figure at every table lifted their glasses in unison. The water inside them sloshed, black and thick. They turned toward me as one, a toast. Their gray hands held high, dripping endlessly. And though no words were spoken, I felt it, pressing inside my skull, louder than thought. "Drink." My glass trembled in front of me, filled with the same black water. The smell coming off it was like rotting algae and iron. My throat closed. Emily's eyes darted to the glass, then back to me. "If you don't," she mouthed silently, "you'll drown anyway." I could hear the steel creaking around us, like the ship itself was waiting for my choice. The glass shook in my hand, and the liquid inside pulsed like it was alive, rippling without me moving. My mouth went dry. Every eye in the room was on me now, milky, lifeless, but heavy, like 1,000 pounds pressing into my chest. I thought about all the warnings I'd heard before boarding. Little things from crew members, stories other passengers joked about. Don't whistle at night. Don't linger alone in the lower decks. Don't open doors that aren't marked. Dumb sailor superstitions. But here I was, staring into the face of whatever truth they'd been avoiding. Emily's lips moved again, barely, almost like she was scared of being caught. "Sip. Just sip." I raised the glass. The stench hit me first, like rusted pipes and seawater left to rot. My stomach rolled, bile climbing my throat. Still, I tilted it. just enough to wet my lips. The liquid was colder than anything I'd ever felt. Not cold like ice, cold like the absence of heat, the absence of life. It burned my tongue, spreading instantly through my chest like frostbite in my veins. I gasped and slammed the glass back down, choking. The room went silent. Every drowned figure froze, watching. My reflection in the black water still rippled long after I set the glass down. And then, slowly, their heads bowed. Like I had passed, Emily grabbed my hand again, this time tight. "We have to move, now." The floor groaned beneath us, that same steel creak echoing from everywhere at once. The chandelier overhead swayed, dripping brine instead of light. The drowned ones didn't stop us, didn't move. They just kept their heads bowed as we slipped out of the room. We stumbled into a corridor I didn't recognize. It wasn't polished and bright like the ship I'd boarded. This hallway was rusted, narrow and wet, pipes hissing along the ceiling, dripping constantly. The hum of the engine was louder here, deeper, like a heartbeat. "Emily," I whispered, "what the hell is this? Where have you been?" She looked at me with tears in her eyes, but they didn't fall. They floated, hanging just above her skin, like the laws of gravity didn't apply. "I tried to warn you, but once you see it, once you're pulled in, you can't go back." "Not really." We turned a corner, and at the far end of the corridor was a door that didn't belong. It was perfectly clean, white, glowing faintly. Dry. The only dry thing I'd seen since that dining hall. "That's it," she said. "Your way out." "And you?" She smiled weakly, shaking her head. "I don't get out. I belong to them now." I wanted to argue, to drag her with me, but the corridor shuddered violently. Water exploded from the pipes, rushing toward us. I ran for the door, fighting the pull of her hand as she stayed rooted. "Go!" she screamed, and then the wave hit. I shoved through the glowing doorway just as the corridor drowned in black water. I woke in my bed, gasping, dry sheets tangled around me. Sunlight streamed through my blinds. My ceiling fan hummed. The sound of the ship's engine was gone. For a long moment I lay there, convincing myself it had all been a dream, a nightmare stitched together by too many horror movies and ocean stories. But when I sat up, something sharp pressed into my side. I reached into my pocket. It was my cruise key card, still damp. And when I turned it over, scrawled across the back in smeared black ink were 3 words in a handwriting I recognized immediately. "Don't come back." Story 4. I've always been a skeptic. Ghost stories, urban legends, curses, they all felt like distractions people made up to explain what they didn't understand. I worked in IT back in Denver, the kind of job where logic and troubleshooting ruled everything. If I couldn't see the problem, isolate it, and fix it, then it probably didn't exist. That's the way I lived my life. Until last summer, when a cruise vacation with my younger sister pulled that certainty out from under me. Her name's Mia. She'd just turned 21, finishing college, and wanted to celebrate before diving into the grind of internships and real jobs. I figured a 7-day Caribbean cruise was harmless fun. Sun, food, open ocean. What could go wrong? The first 2 days were exactly what you'd expect. Buffets piled high, music by the pool, salt air burning our skin just enough to sting. But there was something about the ship that bothered me from the start. The glass. Everywhere you went. Mirrors, reflective walls, windows that never seemed to close out the ocean. It felt like I was constantly being watched, like I was walking through a funhouse that stretched for miles. On the 3rd night, it started. Mia and I had just come back from a late comedy show. We were laughing, still buzzing from overpriced cocktails, when she stopped in front of the mirror outside our cabin. Her smile froze. "What?" I asked. She didn't answer. She just kept staring at the glass. I followed her gaze. For a second, it was us. Just our tired reflections. 2 siblings in vacation clothes. And then, it wasn't. Behind us, in the mirror, stood a little girl, barefoot, pale. Her hair hung damp across her face like she'd just crawled out of a swimming pool, and she was holding Mia's hand. I spun around so fast I almost fell. The hallway was empty. Just carpet, doors, silence. But in the mirror, the girl was still there, smiling. Mia yanked her hand back like she'd been burned. "Did you see that?" she whispered. I wanted to say no, that she was imagining things, but my stomach dropped because I had seen it. I knew what I'd seen. That girl hadn't been a trick of the light. There had been weight in her eyes, purpose in her smile. When we got into the cabin, Mia locked the door and turned on every single light. I tried to calm her down, telling her maybe it was a reflection from another passenger, but deep down, the excuse sounded hollow, even to me. The hallway had been empty. That night, I couldn't sleep. The cabin was dark, windowless, the hum of the engines thrumming in the walls like a heartbeat. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that girl's pale face peeking out from the glass. Around 3 in the morning, I rolled over and froze. The TV screen, black and turned off, reflected the room faintly. In the blur of shadows, I could make out our 2 shapes in the bed, and a third, smaller one, standing near the bathroom door. I sat up fast, heart hammering. The reflection vanished. The screen showed only static black. The next morning, Mia wouldn't eat. She kept glancing at the cabin mirror, as if waiting for someone to appear in it. When I asked if she'd seen anything overnight, she just shook her head. But her silence told me enough. She had. By day 5, we weren't laughing anymore. We avoided the mirrors in the hallways, walking with our heads down. But it didn't matter. Reflections are everywhere on a cruise ship. Polished metal elevators, glass walls, even the sheen of water by the pool. And she followed us. I'd catch her face in the corner of my sunglasses. Or her silhouette standing among people at the buffet, visible only in the glass partition behind them. She never moved when we looked directly, only when we turned away. That night, Mia whispered, "She was sitting on my bed." I didn't ask how she knew. I could tell by the tremble in her voice it wasn't a dream. The 6th day at sea was supposed to be formal night. Everyone dressed up, the dining room sparkling, photos taken on the grand staircase. I tried to convince Mia to go. Maybe normal distractions would snap us out of this paranoia. She agreed reluctantly, slipping into a navy dress she'd packed. For a little while, it almost worked. The chandeliers glowed, music played from the string quartet, and people smiled, clinking champagne glasses. The photographer asked us to pose near the staircase, and for once, Mia managed to smile. The photo printed instantly. My chest tightened the second I saw it. Behind us, blurred slightly as if she were farther back, stood the girl. White dress, head tilted, the faintest smirk tugging her lips. I turned the photo over in my hands, heart racing. When I looked again, she was gone. Just us two, smiling stiffly into the lens. I shoved it in my pocket. I didn't tell Mia, but she knew anyway. Later that night, she cornered me in the cabin, her voice shaking. "You saw her, didn't you?" I lied again, told her she needed rest. But around midnight, when she finally dozed off, I pulled that photo from my pocket. And there she was again, back in the print. The girl didn't vanish this time. Her face seemed clearer, sharper. The ship creaked around me. The smell of salt air seeped through the thin cracks of the door. And in the dark glass of the TV screen, I swore I saw movement. I turned, nothing there. When I looked back at the photo, she was closer. I dropped it, shoved it under my pillow, and lay awake all night, staring at the ceiling, while the steady pulse of the engines reminded me I was trapped miles from shore. By the 7th day, Mia was barely speaking. She sat at breakfast pushing food around her plate, her eyes darting from every polished surface, every glint of steel. I reached out to comfort her. That's when I noticed her reflection in the window wasn't moving in sync. Her real hand lay still on the table. Her reflection's hand was stroking her own hair. I grabbed her wrist, hard. "Don't look at it," I whispered. Mia jerked her hand back like I'd burned her. Her fork clattered against the plate, drawing a few annoyed glances from the nearby tables. She didn't care. She stood so fast her chair toppled. I followed her, weaving through the crowd. She stormed toward the elevators, but every polished surface we passed, chrome panels, mirrors, the reflective marble, showed her differently. In one, she was smiling too wide. In another, her eyes were entirely black. I grabbed her shoulders in the hallway. "Stop! Please stop!" Her breath came in quick gasps. "It's her," she whispered. "She's inside me. I can feel her." I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that she was overtired, stressed. But when I looked at her face in the glass of the elevator door, the girl in white was standing directly behind her, hands on her shoulders. The elevator dinged open and people shuffled out, oblivious. The reflection vanished. We didn't get in. That night, I locked us in the cabin. I closed the curtains, stuffed towels under the bathroom mirror, covered the TV with a spare blanket. Mia sat on the bed, knees pulled to her chest. Around 2 a.m., I must have drifted into a light doze because the sound that woke me wasn't normal ship noise. It wasn't the hum of engines or the groan of steel. It was a giggle, high-pitched, childlike. My eyes snapped open. The TV was uncovered. I swear I'd secured it, but there it was, the black screen reflecting the dim glow of the bedside lamp. And in that reflection, Mia wasn't sitting on the bed anymore. I turned, panicked. She was there, but standing. Right next to me, too close, smiling in the dark. I scrambled back. "Mia?" Her voice was layered, 2 tones at once. She doesn't like to be ignored. I lunged for the light switch. The bulb flared and popped, showering sparks. Darkness swallowed us again. And the mirror in the bathroom, no longer covered, glowed faintly, as if something moved behind it. I don't remember falling asleep. Maybe I blacked out from fear. But in the morning, Mia was gone. Her suitcase sat untouched, her shoes still by the door. The only sign she'd ever been there was the faint imprint on her pillow, smaller than her head should have made. I tore through the cabin like a madman, ripping open the closet, checking under the bed, even opening the tiny safe in case Mia had somehow crawled in. Nothing. I ran into the hallway barefoot, pounding on doors, yelling her name. A few guests peeked out, annoyed, but no one had seen her. Security was called. They searched the cameras, checked the stairwells, questioned me until I felt like a criminal. But every angle of footage they showed me had the same sickening detail. Mia was never on them. Not once. The last clip they pulled up was from the atrium the night before. There I was, holding her hand, guiding her through the crowd. Only, on camera, I was holding no one. My hand was empty. I insisted they were wrong, that the footage was doctored, that the cameras had glitched. But as I shouted, I caught my reflection in the polished conference table where we sat. She was there, the girl in white, not Mia, watching me. I stopped fighting after that. I couldn't. The rest of the cruise blurred into a nightmare I can't fully remember. I know people avoided me, whispering as I walked past. I know the staff became colder, more distant. And I know that every reflective surface, from the water in my glass to the chrome elevator doors, showed her hovering at my side. When the ship docked back in Miami, I stumbled down the gangway alone. No one asked about Mia. No one even acted like she'd existed. I told myself I'd file a missing persons report as soon as I got home. That was the only thing keeping me sane. But when I walked into my apartment, exhausted and shaken, I dropped my bag by the couch and noticed something. My suitcase was lighter. The top zipper was already half open, and when I looked inside, Mia's clothes were folded neatly, tucked next to mine as if they'd always been there. I froze. My hand brushed something stiff at the bottom of the bag. It was the photograph the cruise ship photographer had taken of us on the first day. Except in the print, Mia wasn't next to me. The girl in white was, her small hand curled around mine, smiling up at the camera. And when I looked down at my own reflection in the black screen of my TV across the room, she was still holding my hand. The worst part? The cruise keycard was in my back pocket. And it wasn't mine. I sat there frozen, the keycard pinched between my fingers. It was scratched, old, its magnetic strip almost rubbed bare. When I turned it over, the cabin number printed on it wasn't mine. It was the same number Mia had scribbled on the napkin the night I met her. I don't remember blacking out, but when I came to, the sun had dipped low, bleeding through my blinds in harsh red streaks. My phone buzzed on the table. A new notification, itinerary reminder, formal night, Deck 5 ballroom. The sender was blank. No app, no contact. Just there. I threw the phone across the room. My breath was coming in shallow bursts, my chest aching, but when I turned back toward the mirror hanging above the couch, she was closer. Not standing behind me anymore, standing with me, her pale face nearly pressed against mine, her mouth moving, whispering words I couldn't hear. And then 3 sharp knocks at my door. I didn't move. The knocks came again, harder this time. My heart slammed so hard against my ribs I thought it might tear free. With shaking hands, I walked toward the door, pressed my eye to the peephole. The hallway outside was empty. But in the fisheye glass, distorted and stretched, a white dress rippled in the air. I stumbled back, clutching the keycard so tightly the edges cut into my palm. The third knock rattled the frame, and then silence. I haven't opened the door since. I don't know if it's her waiting, or if it's the ship itself, trying to take me back. All I know is that the smell of the sea has never left my apartment, and when I sleep, I still feel her small, cold hand curled inside mine. Rock. Story 5. You're miles out in the open ocean with nothing but black water extending in all directions before you understand how flimsy your sense of security is. In actuality, a cruise ship is merely steel and glass floating over depths where no one could survive, yet it feels like a floating city. I used to find that concept exciting. It feels like a warning is about to start now. I'm Daniel, and I'm going to tell you about something that happened to me last year while I was on a cruise. I thought that spending a week in the Caribbean would help me decompress after a split, so I booked it. Although I had previously been on ships, this was the first time I had the kind of dreams that make you wonder if you should ever sleep again. Before I even got on board, the first strange incident occurred. The woman at check-in at the terminal checked my boarding pass, scowled, and then scanned it once more. She briefly looked at the coworker next to her as if she had caught a glimpse of something she shouldn't have. Then she waved me through with a too-fast smile. She simply said, "Yes, sir," when I asked if everything was well. At the conclusion, her voice trembled. "Enjoy your cruise." It wasn't until I went looking for my cabin that I gave it more thought. C309 was written on my ticket. Simple enough. However, the hallway numbers changed from 308 to 310 as soon as I got to Deck C, 309. No door. It's just a smooth, newly painted blank wall. I gazed in confusion until someone on the crew walked by. For a brief moment, his expression fell when I asked him where 309 was. He then made an effort to smile professionally. "Sir, you must be wrong." I showed him my pass by pulling it out. That number doesn't exist. But my gut wrenched when I looked down. 309 was no longer the number. 310 was printed on it. I am aware of what I observed. 309 had passed. I went back along the corridor that evening while the majority of the passengers were at the play. And I froze at that moment, because there was now a door where the blank wall had been. 309, a cabin door with brass numerals firmly put in. The lock made a gentle green click as I put my keycard through, even though it shouldn't have. Inside, the cabin was different from the one I had been given. Neither a luggage nor brochures bearing the cruise line were present on the desk. Instead, the air was as frigid as ice and had a little mold odor, like a long-sealed basement. Dusty white sheets covered every item of furniture. My hand went to the lamp, but my gaze was diverted by something else. "Do not stay." I staggered back, my heart pounding in my ears, as deep gouges that appeared frantic were scratched into the wood panel above the bed. It dawned on me then that I wasn't alone. The sound of breathing came from the shadowed corner of the room. Slow. Heavy. Not I didn't wait to find out what it was or who it was. I ran down the hallway, slamming the door behind me. The door was gone once more when I ventured to look behind me. Where it had been, there was nothing but a blank wall. Imagining things, I tried to convince myself that I was overtired the following morning, but every passenger and employee dismissed me when I casually inquired about the cabin numbers, until one bartender whispered, "Don't ask about that room," leaning in and speaking softly, "People who remain there don't return." He appeared to be about to continue, but he left after someone called his name. Nervously, I laughed into my drink. Inside, however, a single, icy, piercing notion kept coming to mind. My name had been on that cabin. Additionally, I had already entered. After that evening, I didn't get much sleep. I vowed that I could hear faint knocks coming through the walls whenever the ship rocked against the waves, as though someone in that missing cabin was attempting to communicate with me. I had persuaded myself that I needed answers by dawn. Reasonable responses. Phantom suites aren't the only feature of cruise ships. It might have been storage. A maintenance area, perhaps. Something sensible. I went to guest services and waited in line between a youngster who was locked out of his cabin and an older couple who were complaining about their meal reservations. Finally, I passed my keycard across the counter when it was my time. "Is my cabin assignment confirmed?" I inquired. The woman grinned after typing quickly. "Mr. Hall, you're in C310. Is everything all right?" I made an effort to nod. "Indeed." "I just thought maybe there was a printing error." "No, sir." Her smile never wavered, but I saw that her hand was holding her pen too firmly, causing her knuckles to whiten. "Cabine 309 doesn't exist." The line behind me moved impatiently as I began to press, but she leaned forward just enough to whisper, "Don't ask about it again," so that only I could hear. Feeling more uneasy than ever, I muttered my gratitude and turned to leave. To feel normal that night, I participated in a trivia game in one of the lounges. Bright lights, synthetic music, and other travelers giggling over beverages made it work for a time. However, I saw a man at the bar staring at me straight when I was in the middle of a round. No one else seemed to notice that he was pale and that water was steadily trickling down his shirt collar. He raised his drink, flashed me a toothy smile, and mouthed a sound I couldn't hear. He vanished as soon as I blinked. My hands were shaking by the time I returned to my cabin. I slipped the balcony lock into position, pressed the desk chair firmly against the door, and sat quietly. Deep underneath us, the only sound was the quiet hum of the engines. I heard it at that point. Thud, thud, thud. There are 3 knocks, from behind my bed on the wall, where the missing 309 would have been, exactly. I touched the panel with my ear. There was silence for a while. A man's voice then muttered, "Let me out," so faint I believed I had dreamt it. I staggered back, my heart thumping. I almost dropped my phone, but I managed to get it to work and made a shaky video. Perhaps someone would believe me if I had evidence. "If anyone sees this later, this cabin shouldn't exist," I muttered into the camera. I froze halfway through. Something's inside it. My phone's screen showed a stranger standing behind me, in addition to me. Tall. Still. In the glass, its face appears fuzzy. I turned around. There is nothing there. I was aware that I couldn't go another night without finding out. I made the decision to find the bartender who had forewarned. He wouldn't look me in the eyes when I found him the following day. However, he sighed and poured me a drink without charging me when I pleaded. "There was a passenger in 309 last season," he said in a low, tremulous voice. "Young man, on his own trip. His room was completely soaked when they arrived. No leaks anywhere, no broken pipes. Only his room. They dragged him away, but," he interrupted, looking back. "Look, you'll stay out of there if you're smart." I wanted to ask more, but before I could, another crew member showed up, giving him a shoulder pat and guiding him away with a fake smile. Some doors aren't meant to open. He never gave me a second glance. I couldn't help myself when the ship entered open waters that night under a moonless sky. I went back down the hall. It was a smooth wall. Nothing. No door. But now I knew better. I touched the spot where 309 should have been with my palm. The wall then retaliated. I didn't get much sleep. I jolted to my feet at every ship creak and every shuffle of footfall in the hallway. But something had gone too far, and it was no longer just paranoia. I was resolved to test reality by dawn. I began recording after pressing my phone up against the wall where the door should have been. I muttered, "This is C-310, and cabin 309 should be right here. They say it doesn't exist, but..." I started, but my words were interrupted by the wall's light ripples, which resembled heat waves on asphalt. I almost dropped the phone as I staggered back. The video verified that there was a handle outline visible for a half second, a door, then nothing. Later that afternoon, I smelled something metallic and sharp as I passed one of the silent hallways close to the crew-only sections. Like blood or rust. Unnaturally, the air was colder there. I froze as I turned the corner. Standing at a door, a cabin steward in a clean ironed uniform was carefully wiping the brass numerals. I fixed my gaze on the 309 plaque. I blinked. The steward was gone when I opened my eyes once more. The plaque is also gone, just a blank, smooth wall. My neck pricked with hair. This was not what I had imagined. I heard the sound of rushing water when I woke up that night. I initially believed that the bathroom sink was still in place. However, the carpet was damp when I swung my legs off the bed. Freezing. I was filled with panic. Dry, I yanked the bathroom door open. No leaks. The water appeared to flow forth like veins, straight from the floor itself. Then I heard it again, louder this time. "Let me out!" Nearer. I retreated to the balcony, but the sliding door remained in place. The lock became stuck. Now the water lapped around my ankles, smelling faintly of rotting and being salty and unpleasant. I reached for the phone, searching for a signal, but there was none. Static flickered on the screen before everything went black. The reflection staring back at me when it relit up wasn't mine. The dude from the lounge was there. His lips were blue from drowning. His complexion was gray, and his eyes were wide. Once more, he mouthed the words. I yelled and threw the phone across the room, saying, "Let me out!" Everything stopped when it struck the wall. There was no more water. The carpet had dried. The faint buzz of the ship's engines was the only sound to break the deep silence. I pushed myself out into the hallway, trembling. Everything seemed in fleeting flashes as the lights in the hallway flickered. I wasn't alone myself. A number of people, possibly passengers, stood at the far end. Their clothing was drenched, clinging to their bodies, and somehow out of style. They did not move as they gazed at me. And they lifted their hands and pointed, one by one. Not at me. 309 should have been at the wall. My footsteps reverberated along the hallway as I ran. I continued till I returned to the atrium, where the air was filled with lively voices and dazzling lights. I briefly believed that I had gotten away. The ship's daily schedule board was suddenly visible to me. A note I had never seen before scrolled across in cheery lettering, "Cabin 309 Memorial tonight at midnight. Welcome guests." I was out of breath. Gazing at the brilliant letters on the schedule board, I felt a weight on my chest. A memorial service for a purportedly non-existent cabin? I had intended to rush to the purser's desk and demand explanations, but when I turned around, the letters had vanished, as if it had never existed. I tried to divert myself all day. I wandered the deck, ate, and even made small chat with people I didn't know. However, I noticed small clues everywhere I went. A waiter carrying a tray of beverages stopped in the middle of his stride and said, "Don't leave." In the elevator, a child tugged at my arm while she stared past me at nothing before her mother pulled her away. Even the atrium's musicians, midway through their song, the melody changed to something unfitting and melancholy. By midnight, my interest and horror were so intertwined that I was unable to separate them. I was walking the silent hallway once more against my better judgment, the one that usually had a slight seawater odor. As the ship moved, the lights went out. I heard voices after that, echoing from that wall, not in my mind this time. Muffled music, clinking drinks and laughter. A gathering. I put my ear to the location where cabin 309 ought to have been. My heart pounded. I heard it as clearly as day. "Don't be late. Midnight Buffet," the announcement's exact words. and then my hand suddenly fell forward. The wall had become soft, like water rather than solid. My fingers went right through my entire arm. Gasping and soaking with freezing waters, I yanked it back. My hand's skin was wrinkled and pallid, as if it had been in the water for hours. I clutched it to my chest as I staggered backward. As if whoever or whatever was inside had noticed me, the laughter on the other side became louder. The lights in the corridor abruptly went out. A single door, trimmed in gold, glowed dimly in the darkness in front of them. 309. It was authentic. From the inside, the knob turned. All of my instincts told me to run. However, my legs became immobile. As though the ship itself were tilting, a line of icy water slid across my shoes, flooding only this corridor. The door opened with a squeak. The stench of the water was overpowering, heavy, and putrid, and behind it were wet, bloated, gray-skinned individuals in dresses and tuxedos. Their smiles were too harsh and too white. "Welcome, guest," one of them remarked, holding up a glass of champagne. Before I could scream, thousands of clammy, wet hands grabbed me and dragged me toward the doorway into that unattainable room. "We've been expecting you." My fingernails scraped the doorframe as I twisted and clawed, but my cries were drowned out by the music. Then, quietness. I don't recall going black, but I was in that ballroom when I opened my eyes. It was larger than the ship itself. Overhead, chandeliers dangled, dripping not with gems but with salt water. Food sat on tables that seemed to go on forever, until you blinked. After that, it was twisted with seaweed between platters wrought in fish bones. With their gowns and tuxedos wet and their shoes squelching on the sopping floor, the guests giggled. Like creatures from the deep sea, their eyes reflected the candlelight with a faint gleam. In the corner, a string quartet played, but the instruments were distorted and the music bent in ways that gave me headaches. I was handed a glass by someone. I have no idea who they are, but they sprang out of nowhere, looming over me and wrapping their swollen fingers around mine. The glass did not contain champagne. It was substantial, dark. It had an ocean floor scent to it. Dozens of voices merged into one as they all whispered, "Drink." I had a locked throat. I gave a head shake. The room froze. All the figures turned to face me. Their jaws leaked water steadily. Their laughing was not as heavy on me as the stillness. "Drink," they said again, this time louder. My hand trembled as I held the glass. Its surface rippled with my reflection, a drowned form of myself, not quite my. Lips ripped, eyes clouded, skin blue. I threw it across the ballroom while screaming. The glass didn't break. Rather, it disintegrated in midair, splattering into waves that swept the floor. The visitors lunged with it. I was pulled under by hands that clawed at my neck and arms. I choked as I fell, not on air, but on limitless seawater. My lungs were burning. I kicked and struggled, but the surface had vanished, leaving only blackness and muffled laughter resonating overhead. "You're ours now?" A voice snarled at my ear from somewhere in the unending black. Like everyone else, I woke up in my cabin, gasping, and my linens were saturated. The time was 7:12 a.m. I briefly persuaded myself that it was a nightmare. However, my sneakers were still wet when I looked down. My pants, cuffs were coated with salt crystals. My fingernails were shattered and torn by a rough object. And there was a single glass of champagne on the small desk in the corner of my cabin. It's half full. Another announcement came over the PA system that evening. "Be calm. Happy." Too happy. Ladies and gentlemen, just a friendly reminder that the Grand Ballroom will host a special gathering tonight at midnight. We hope to see you there. I turned off my room's speaker, but it made no difference. I could still hear the faint sound of drinks clinking and laughter coming through the walls even without it. And I promise you that occasionally, as I walk past that section of the hallway, I see a wet footprint that isn't mine, and it leads directly to cabin 309. Don't enter a ballroom that no one acknowledges exists or a door that shouldn't be there if you're ever on a cruise. Pay no attention to the laughing, because you won't ever leave after hearing the toast. Story 6. They said that the cruise was completely booked. Every person was checked in, every cabin was accounted for, and each wristband was scanned at boarding. However, the woman in the red dress was standing at the end of a hallway without a stateroom when I first spotted her. I'm 38 years old, a high school history teacher in Portland, Oregon, and my name is Jacob Whitmore. It was not actually my idea to go on this cruise. After a tumultuous divorce the previous year, my younger sister, Claire, virtually compelled me to join. I'm not a big drinker, I'm not exactly a social butterfly, and I'm definitely not the type of person who joins up for karaoke nights, but she suggested I needed a change of scenery. However, she purchased the ticket and forced me to swear that I would at least make an effort to have fun. I expected unpleasant social encounters along with boredom when I boarded the ship. However, something didn't feel right from the first night. After supper, I recall making my way back to my accommodation on foot. It was a small hallway, the kind where the ceiling lights hummed softly, like dying bees, and the carpet muted every step. I noticed her at that point. At the far end of the hallway, a woman in a crimson evening gown stood motionless, her head cocked slightly, as though she was listening for something I couldn't hear. Her hands were clenched in front of her, motionless, and her dark hair was hanging straight down. She vanished as soon as I blinked. I chalked it up to tiredness and laughed uncomfortably to myself. However, I discovered there was nothing there when I got to the end of the hallway. No service hatch, no door, and no access panel. She had been standing on a blank wall. I brought it up to Claire at breakfast the following morning. She made fun of me for already imagining ghosts, but her smile wavered when I explained the same outfit and stance. She said she saw a woman who didn't go through security, just strolled past the line as if no one else saw during embarkation. Something about the way Claire lowered her voice made me uneasy, even though I wanted to brush it off. She had stopped making jokes. Later that day, my curiosity overcame me. I asked amiably at the guest services desk if there was a formal function or themed party planned for the previous evening. With a courteous grin, the woman behind the desk shook her head. She looked down at her monitor and scrolled through the manifest when I pressed her further, asking if there had been a passenger wearing a red outfit. She paused, then responded, "I'm sorry, sir, there's no one matching that description aboard." That should have cleared the air. However, it wasn't. I heard light footsteps outside my door that night as I was lying in my cottage. Nor rushed, nor carefree. Slow, methodical, nearly dragging. The corridor was deserted as I opened the door. Nevertheless, the subtle scent of sea air persisted, as though someone had been there. I attempted to laugh it off once more, but in that small area my laughter sounded empty. It got out of hand on the third night. Claire and I saw her at the far end of another hallway on our way back from one of the lounges. She was wearing the same crimson dress and was standing rigidly. Claire's grip on my arm was so firm this time that it hurt. "You see her, don't you?" she muttered. The woman turned her head toward us, her face expressionless and pale under the artificial light, and we both observed. The lights in the corridor flickered for a second, and then she was gone. However, we both realized that she had been sincere this time. I was unable to deny it. By the fourth night of the voyage, whatever she wasn't merely a figment of my weary imagination. When Claire and I talked about her, we whispered softly, almost like kids whispering about the boogeyman, for fear that she would hear. My attention was drawn to the ship's layout. Every deck level, every stairway, and every hallway started to blend together in the same steel door and carpet patterns. However, whenever the woman did show up, it was in inappropriate places. A corridor that leads nowhere. No cabin numbers on a wall. At one point, visitors weren't even supposed to be near the laundry access. Claire requested that we accompany her to the front desk. The young man behind the counter was named Elliot, and I remember him. When Claire supported me, his fake smile wavered as I explained what we had seen. "We've received comments before," he said after he paused. Then he leaned forward and spoke in a lower voice. "Officially, sir, there isn't a passenger like that. Informally." He trailed off, looking at the other employee in the vicinity. He then excused himself to the back office without finishing and never came back. I realized we were in over our heads at that point. Claire persuaded me to attend the live music in the ballroom the following evening. It was meant to divert our attention. The band was playing, the drinks were flowing, and couples were dancing on the floor in the warm golden light. I gave myself permission to unwind for a few minutes. Right up till I saw her. She was looking out over the dance floor from the other balcony. Her red gown gleamed in the sunlight as if it were crafted from molten glass. She merely looked down at us without moving, grinning, or clapping in time with the music. Claire's cheeks lost color as she followed my eyes after I grasped her wrist. "Jake," she muttered, "she's not clapping." It was a trivial, insignificant remark, but she was correct. Everyone in her immediate vicinity moved organically in response to the laughter and music. This woman, however, was stuck in the past. Then, the most bizarre thing occurred. I think she glanced right at me for the tiniest moment. Not in a hazy way, like when you think someone on the other side of the room could be looking at you. As if she had been waiting for me to notice, she turned her head and fixed her eyes on mine. Then, she was gone. Claire wanted to go right away, but I made myself stay and pretend to take a sip of my drink. I had shaking hands. Ignorant, the band continued to play. I also began to notice other details. A couple from New Jersey that we had seated with earlier in the vacation never showed up again in the dining hall the next morning. With half-eaten fruit remaining on their plates, their table was deserted. Our server blinked, as if she didn't know who I was referring to when I asked her about them. She answered stiffly, "We only seat full tables," and turned to go. Later, I heard two crew members whispering close to the railings while I was pacing the observation deck by myself. The only words I managed to catch were, "Manifest doesn't match," and "Captain said not to speak of it." As soon as they realized I was there, they stopped talking. The footsteps outside my hut reappeared that night. Louder this time, nearer. I could hear fingernails slowly dragging over the wood and knuckles rubbing against the door. My skin pricked. Someone was breathing on the other side, so I froze and pushed my ear to the door. However, the corridor was empty when I opened the door. I'm not sure why, but I said aloud in a whisper, "What do you want?" There was a slight seawater odor in the air. I took my phone back inside and started taking notes, hoping that by doing so I would be protected. I made myself say, "If anyone hears this later, please, just know we weren't imagining her, even though my voice was shaking. She is authentic." I hesitated after saying it, thinking how crazy I must have sounded. And if you're hearing this on Midnight Outcry, take 2 seconds to subscribe. It helps keep stories like this alive. At that moment, however, sanity was sliding out of my grasp like sand. The manifest did not include the woman. She was aboard this ship, though. She was also observing us. The ship seemed strange by the 5th day for reasons I couldn't quite put my finger on. Claire also mentioned how the elevator occasionally led us to floors that didn't correspond with the deck charts, and how the hallways appeared longer. Little things that we had previously dismissed seemed like intentional traps. The woman behind the counter informed us that there was no Elliot assigned to guest services when we attempted to locate the desk clerk who had given us a half warning. When we pressed, she gave us a wide, almost practiced smile and said the same thing again. "Maybe you misread the name." Her tone sounded accusatory. Everything broke that night. The overhead PA system came to light shortly after midnight. "Ladies and gentlemen, we invite you to enjoy a complimentary midnight reception in the main ballroom," said a calm male voice after a moment of static. "Live entertainment, cocktails, and hors d'oeuvre are in store." I recall rising up straight in bed and gazing at the ceiling speaker because the voice seemed off. Played on an ancient tape, it was a little distorted and slowed down. Claire also sat up. After 10, the ballroom was closed, Jake. Despite what they informed us, we could still hear a little tune float down the corridor. We weren't the only ones who were interested. We observed from the entrance of our cabin as groups of people in pajamas or robes shuffled toward the ballroom, whispering about free drinks. Their expressions appeared stunned, almost mesmerized. I wanted to yell at them to stop, but my voice was frozen. One pair even turned to wave at us as Claire whispered, "Don't," and clutched my arm till it was marked. "You're not seeing it," the man said with a smile. His wife's eyes widened as she giggled. They vanished through the doors of the ballroom. The problem is that the doors to the ballroom never opened. They strode directly toward the locked, closed door. The door briefly glistened, as though heat were causing ripples in the air, and then they vanished. The volume of the music rose, clinking glasses. From within came the distorted sound of a woman's giggle, as if it were being heard underwater. Claire and I ran away. Breathing sea air as if it were the only thing keeping us sane, we spent the next hour on the outer decks. The ballroom doors were still sealed, and the hall was quiet when we eventually made our way back. None of the passengers returned. Their cabins were scrubbed naked the following morning. Names were removed from the daily activity listings, bags were gone, and sheets were folded. Not even the electronic room keys were functional anymore. They appeared to have had no reservations at all. A steward was cleaning the corridor when I addressed him. "Where is everyone in 402? What about 404? He looked at me with a bland civility that made me feel colder than fury would have. "They went into the ballroom last night. Those cabins were never occupied, sir." Claire was already sobbing softly and shaking her head as I looked around. I was roaming the ship that afternoon when I noticed my reflection in one of the tinted windows on Deck 7. At first glance, I appeared normal, tired and hollow-eyed. My reflection then blinked slightly out of time. It's only a beat late. And behind me, in the background of that glass, was the red dress. I turned around. The hall is empty. My legs became weak. I would never again experience a typical moment on the ship. Claire and I decided that evening that we couldn't wait around. What was going on this ship had to be known to us. With just our keycards and a flashlight, we crept out of our cabin after waiting until the hallways were quiet. The hall's air felt heavier and warmer than it should have been, as if the ventilation had been turned off. We headed for the service corridors, which were off-limits to passengers. Earlier that day, I checked a gray steel door after noticing a steward vanish behind it. I was surprised to find it unlocked. Inside, the lighting was intense and humming, and the walls were thinner. We slipped by stacks of folded linens, containers of supplies, and even laundry carts. The scores of old bags crammed into one wall, however, were what really got me chilly. Tags are still present. Names of the passengers. I recognized a few of the identities from the deleted activity lists. "Oh my God, Jake, these are theirs," Claire muttered. "These are the ones who never returned." I wanted to turn around at that moment, but something drew me farther down the corridor. A low hum, mixed with voices, akin to an engine. The voices weren't natural, they were long, overlapping murmurs. We pursued the sound until we came to a small wired glass window in a barred bulkhead door. I leaned forward and my breath frothed the glass. On the opposite side was the ballroom. However, it was no longer a ballroom. The same passengers that had disappeared were there. There they were, heads lowered as though in prayer, bodies lined up in rigid rows. Their faces changed from being alive to becoming pale, hollow-eyed shells as the air above them shimmered. The woman with the crimson dress stood at the far end of the room, conducting a silent orchestra. She jerked her head up. She stared right at me through the glass, I swear. I almost dropped the torch when I staggered back so quickly. She noticed me. I muttered, my throat parched. Claire took hold of my hand. "We must flee. Right now." However, the corridor behind us was no longer empty when we turned. 3 crewmen stood there, their smiles too broad, their clothes immaculate. Their eyes glowed strangely, reflecting the fluorescent lights in a manner that is inappropriate for human eyes. One of them said, "Guests are not permitted in staff areas," in a smooth, practiced voice similar to the one used by the guest services clerk earlier. "Return to your cabin, please." My instincts begged me not to comply. I grasped Claire's hand more tightly. We pushed by them and sprinted down the service corridor, saying, "Run!" The soldiers didn't pursue right away, but soon we could hear their methodical, steady footsteps behind us, as if they knew we wouldn't be able to get away very far. Gasping, we exploded back onto the passenger deck. However, the hallways were different. The patterned carpet appeared to be moist, and the lighting had been turned down to a sickening yellow. Wet, as if drenched in ocean. I could hear squelches beneath my sneakers with every stride. Claire was correct when she said, "Jake, the ship is changing," with a trembling voice. It seemed as though the hallways themselves were bending to keep us inside, with ceilings falling lower at every turn. When we eventually arrived at our cabin, we pushed a chair up against the door and slammed it. I dropped the flashlight twice because my hands were shaking so much. Throughout the night, we heard faint music coming from the ballroom below, gentle knocks on the door, and even a whisper coming through the air vent. The voice wasn't Claire's. Furthermore, it wasn't mine. My name was said. I recognized then that we were more than just passengers. They were counting us. There was never any sleep. Even though there was nobody there each time I peered through the peephole, the knocking on the door persisted until morning. There was nothing but an impossibly long, empty hallway, with walls that rippled somewhat like water's surface. I told Claire that we needed to pretend nothing had happened by morning. Mix in. Act as though we didn't notice the baggage or the ballroom. Act as though we weren't on their roster. However, with a smile I will never forget, the waiter placed 2 dishes in front of us as we attempted to order breakfast. For me, pancakes. Claire's scrambled eggs. It wasn't food though, because as I cut into the pancake, a rich scarlet oozed across the dish. As Claire's eggs writhed and jerked like live things, her fork clattered to the ground. All of the other passengers continued to eat as if nothing had happened. Talking, laughing, and chewing. Nobody seemed to be paying any attention. We departed right away, and that's when I realized we wouldn't be able to finish this voyage. No matter how impossible it appeared, we had to leave this ship. We made another attempt to locate the ballroom that evening. I reasoned that it might just be a room once more if we could catch it during the day. However, the steel door had vanished. Just a smooth bulkhead with no seams or handles, as if it had never been. "Jake, they're going to take us," Claire sobbed in the hallway, her voice a frantic whisper. Like the others, I wanted to reassure her, but I was no longer able to lie. She was correct. The 4th night was the pivotal moment. The intercom system sounded another announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, please join us in the grand ballroom for tonight's gala celebration." The words came down to me like icy water in the same upbeat, polished voice. Passengers were not allowed to enter the great ballroom. However, all of the deck's doors opened simultaneously, and I saw dozens of visitors enter the hall grinning like puppets being moved by unseen strings. Claire took hold of my arm. Don't follow them." However, I came to the realization that they would notice if we didn't go. We would be noticeable. The staff was already aware that we had witnessed too much. Thus, we joined the body flow. When the elevator dinged, the number 13, which shouldn't have been there, glowed on its panel. My legs locked, but we were forced inside by the crowd's pressure. It was a lengthy ride, much longer than any elevator ride ought to be. The air grew colder, the floor trembled under our feet, and everyone around us started humming. Simultaneously, the same droning low melody. I had never seen a deck like this before until the doors were opened. It was an actual ballroom. A huge chamber had chandeliers glowing above it, silver platters and crystal glasses filled with black-looking wine spilled over tables. The air was filled with music, although there were no speakers or a band, just noise with no origin. When she saw me, the woman in the crimson dress smiled broadly and walked across the floor, saying gently, though her lips never moved, "Welcome, Jake." Claire gave my palm a painful squeeze and said, "We've been waiting." Her voice faltered. "Don't let go." I made an effort. However, like waves tearing us apart in a flood, the crowd flowed around us, separating us with terrifying ease. I called out her name, but the clinking of glasses, the music, and the laughter overpowered my voice. The woman's icy cold fingertips grazing my cheek was the last thing I remembered before everything turned black. I wasn't at my cabin when I woke up. As like nothing had happened, I was sitting in a lounge chair with my back to the water. Everything was back to normal as passengers walked the deck and crew personnel hustled about. However, Claire had left. I demanded that the manifest be checked when I approached the purser's desk. With the same courteous, unwavering smile, the clerk typed and looked at the screen. "Sir, there is no documentation of any visitor named Claire accompanying us." I banged my palm against the counter, thinking maybe you boarded alone. "That isn't feasible. She was right here, and I was. I had her with me." The clerk merely cocked his head a little. "How are you feeling?" I stumbled back. Although people continued to pass me, they no longer gave me direct attention. They glanced over me as if I weren't there. It dawned on me then. Nor was I listed on the manifest. Additionally, this ship does more than just carry passengers. They are erased. Therefore, do not attend a gala in the large ballroom if you ever hear about it. Don't even pay attention, because you will never return to your room if you do.